Afternoon and welcome to the third CBHN Health Equity Forum of 2021. Our session today is COVID-19 vaccine from research to community. And I'm super excited about the two guests that we have with us today, Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett and Dr. Noha Aboelata. And I'm beyond honored to be in the presence of these two amazing women and have them participate in our Health Equity Forum. But before we get started with the program, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. So the format will follow the typical approach that we've had in the past, a conversational style interview followed by an audience Q&A. The chat box will be, the chat box will be disabled. And so please post your questions in the Q&A box and note whether or not you want the question to be specifically for Dr. Corbett or Dr. Noha or either one. Everyone will remain muted throughout the duration of the session. And before we get started and I introduce our featured guests, I'd like to give just a brief overview for those of you who do not know or are familiar with CBHN, just to give you a little bit of information on what we're all about and what we are. So CBHN was founded in 1978. Our first statewide conference was in 1980. And then from there, we expanded to chapter and affiliate model across the state. CBHN was incorporated as a 501c3 in 1983 and became an official statewide organization. A couple of things that we're noted for in terms of the history and being part of making history in the state of California is that we were instrumental in creating the Office of Multicultural Health and also co-founding the California Pan-Ethnic Health Network, or otherwise known as CPEN. And we are known as the voice and trusted resource for Black health equity in California. And CBHN is the only Black-led statewide organization dedicated to advocating for health equity for all African Americans and Black immigrants here in the state. And our vision and focus going forward is to really do whatever we can to create a California where every African American and Black immigrant has the opportunity to live a long, healthy life free from violence, racism, and health inequities. And so every day we work to ensure that all Black Californians, regardless of how well educated they are, how much money they make, where they live, who they love, how they identify, or what country they're from, have access to high quality, equitable primary and behavioral health care and avoid unnecessarily succumbing to disease. Now, before we get started, there's just one last thing that we'd like for you to do before we introduce our guest today. So we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to respond to a quick poll. So if you could please answer the following questions. Do you have concerns about the vaccine? Yes or no? If you've not been vaccinated, are you planning to? And 3, do you trust the vaccines to be safe and effective? So if you could take just a minute to respond to those questions, we would greatly appreciate it. So thank you very much for taking the poll. It looks like we have a lot of folks on the Zoom today who have already been vaccinated and seem to be very confident in the vaccine and its efficacy as well as its safety. So now, the moment that you all have been waiting for, it is my great pleasure to introduce to everyone Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. Dr. Corbett is a research fellow and team lead for coronavirus research within the Viral Pathogenesis Laboratory and Vaccine Research Center at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease at the National Institute of Health. She is a postdoctorate research fellow at the center, at the Vaccine Research Center, and was appointed to the VRC in 2014. She serves as the team lead for coronavirus research within the VRC's Viral Pathogenesis Laboratory under the supervision and scientific leadership of Dr. Barney S. Graham. In this role, she conducts basic and preclinical research and has worked on preclinical development of the mRNA 1273 vaccine against COVID-19. A viral immunologist by training, Dr. Corbett's research investigates the mechanisms of viral pathogenesis and host immunity as they pertain to the vaccine development, In addition to basic and preclinical research, Dr. Corbett invests much of her time bringing STEM awareness to youth and local communities through mentoring and volunteering. Combining her scientific interest with her knack for mentoring, she aspires to become an independent principal investigator. Next is Dr. Noha Aboelata. She is the founder and CEO of Roots Community Health Center. Next slide, please. A 501c3 community health center licensed by the state of California that is located in Oakland. Roots has been around for quite a while, and Dr. Noha is a board certified family physician and an experienced leader and manager of healthcare institutions. And as an advocate, she's committed to eliminating health disparities among low-income populations in East Oakland and its surrounding communities. As CEO of Roots, Dr. Aboelata, or Dr. Noha, as we fondly call her, is responsible for the overall organizational strategic direction, programming design, contracting, and oversight, as well as leadership and management, including oversight of financial management, HR management, and community partnerships. Before founding Roots and Roots Alliance, Dr. Noha served in a variety of executive management positions at federally qualified healthcare centers. I am passing the baton today over to Dr. Noha to lead the discussion and facilitate the conversation. So without further ado, Dr. Noha, take it away.
Thank you so much. Dr. Corbett, I've been so looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for the work you've done. I mean, it's world changing. It's so impactful. It's so tremendous. I have so many questions, but I promise that I'm not going to hog up all the time. I know we want to get questions from the audience as well, but I'm going to start with some of my own. I guess first I just want to know, about your journey to get here. I mean, listening to your bio and reading about your history, I don't know if there's a lot of little girls that go, I want to be in the lab doing this type of research. So how did you get here? Did you always want to be a researcher? Were there mentors along the way? Just tell me a little bit about your journey.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I started doing research when I was 16 years old. I obviously was not making vaccines at that time, but I did have an internship in a lab, and that was where my exposure started. And that's where my intrigue started when I was 16. It was after that one summer where I realized, okay, I could do this for the rest of my life. This is fun. I really like the day-to-day dynamic life of a scientist, which I'm still living. And it was from that moment on that I just took the necessary scholastic and otherwise steps to get to the point where I am now, where, I've been leading this team for coronavirus research at the National Institutes of Health for the last 6.5 years. And I am on the way to Harvard in about 3 weeks to start my own lab. So yeah.
I heard. Congratulations. That is amazing. Well deserved. So I know you mentioned, having a team, and, I know that there's a lot of people across the globe that have been working on this, but like, as far as I'm concerned and we're concerned, you're the face of the COVID vaccine. What has that been like, being the face of it? Because I'm sure in the science in the lab, you probably never imagined yourself being on screen this much and sort of being the face of this. What's that been like for you?
I actually consider Dr. Fauci the face and the voice of the COVID vaccine. He is on TV every day, and I may be on TV once every 2 weeks or something. But it's been this is actually the opposite of why I actually chose to do coronavirus research to begin. Coronaviruses were largely unknown as a family of viruses. They were fairly understudied. So scientifically, I could do a lot in the field, but it never presented the point where I would be in front of people in this way, because it just didn't seem like it would be that big of a concern unless there was an outbreak or a pandemic like now. So I'm basically just stepping in my purpose. And so it's different. I will say that being recognized whenever I leave the house is a different feeling, but the purpose is that my knowledge was, and our team's knowledge was able to be used to make COVID vaccines. And so I'm happy about that.
That's fantastic. We're happy about it too. So I want to, like Rhonda mentioned at the beginning, I lead a community health center headquartered in Oakland, in an area that really has seen some of the highest case rates throughout the pandemic and is now having some of the lowest vaccination rates as well. And so I want to pivot a little bit to the concerns that we hear on the ground, and hope that you can help with that. One thing that I know you probably heard all the different myths and things that are out there, but one thing that comes up a lot is that this can somehow change your DNA. And so we know it cannot change your DNA, but can you you're the scientist, can you tell us why it can't change your DNA? How do we know it can't change your DNA?
It's literally impossible. Okay, so first of all, we keep saying it. And so I want to just remind everyone that as far as the United States vaccines portfolio to date, there are 3 different coronavirus vaccines. There's Moderna, Pfizer's, and Johnson & Johnson's. Moderna and Pfizer's are messenger mRNA. So what that means is that it basically is a way to send a message, like a Snapchat message, to your body so that your body can make a really good immune response to COVID. Now, with that being said, because the RNA part is in there and people associate RNA with DNA, everyone's like, oh my God, it's going to change my DNA. But if you think about my head, which is huge and not to scale, but if you think about my head like a cell, like inside of your body, one eye is where DNA is housed, and then the other eye is where messenger RNA is housed. There's no way, no matter how I cross my eyes, that my 2 eyes meet in the middle. And that's exactly how it is inside of your body. Wherever that message goes, it doesn't come in contact with your DNA. It can't come in contact with your DNA. And your cells, just like my head, it's built, it compartmentalized in that way that type of mistake just would never happen. And that's been proven time and time again, actually, since the beginning of understanding how to use messenger RNA for therapeutics. And so it's just impossible biologically for that to happen. So you don't have to worry about your DNA being altered. And the really cool thing, as I make the analogy to a Snapchat message, is that these vaccines, the message that it sends to your cells, that message is gone in 24 to 48 hours, just like a Snapchat message. It doesn't linger around in your body for long at all. It doesn't need to in order to do its job.
It's so amazing. And thank you for breaking it down like that, because I think a lot of times the messages that people hear is, oh, it can't do that. Don't worry about that. But it's like, well, I wanted to hear straight from you why. And that was a great analogy that really, it can't even get to the compartment where the DNA is made. So it can't, there's no way, it's impossible for that to happen. So that is amazing. So that really brings up a question for me. I mean, what is this technology like mean for the future? I mean, do you think that this is going to change how vaccines are done for other things going forward? Does this mean anything in other areas? Or is this going to be like, this is going to be the last time we hear about mRNA and we're going to go back to how we did things before?
No. There is over 20 companies that have started in the last year. So everyone is thinking about how to utilize messenger RNA in the future. Actually, Moderna, the company that we co-developed our vaccine with, they started as a cancer therapeutic company. And so the breadth of which one can use messenger RNA to target different diseases is so broad, almost infinite. I think at this point, the possibilities are large. There's flu vaccines underway. There was a Zika vaccine trial, obviously coronaviruses, and just so many different viruses that probably will be targeted in the next several years, and for our lifetimes, really.
So even though this is sort of new to people, we know the technology has been around for a really long time, but we now have an experience of using it on a mass scale. And so you're saying that we should just get used to the fact that mRNA is now going to be part of how we address diseases and infectious diseases and so forth going forward.
I think that it definitely sits as one of the platforms. And so that's just how we say it. So the ways that you give a vaccine, it definitely sits in the top of as one of the better platforms for delivery, because it's easy to manufacture. It's really, the FDA understands how this is made, and it's because it's so easy and so reliable to manufacture. That's a really good thing when you're thinking about mass amounts of vaccines that have to be given out to the entire world. So we'll see.
Great, that's good to know. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of talk about, you know, you can't trust the pharmaceutical industry, and we know that there's been harms done. You know, we look at you know, the opioid epidemic and other things like that, and things that in our community that we know have definitely caused harm. And so you hear this piece about you can't trust the pharmaceutical companies. And so, can you talk through, you know, to me, you know, I say it's really not about trusting or not trusting. It's about what is in place to help regulate and to provide oversight. So can you talk through, are these companies just out there rogue, just doing what they do, and we either got to trust them or not trust them, or are there things in place that we could have confidence in and look to help provide oversight and keep us safe?
There are tons of checkpoints in the system that vet these companies so stringently, especially with vaccines, because one of the things that we have to remember is that vaccines are one of the few things that you give to a person to prevent a disease. And also because of that, generally speaking, they're given to completely healthy people. So the regulation, the regulators at the FDA, they vet the vaccines to the point of saying, is this risk assessment good enough? Is there a low enough risk that we're willing to give this to millions of healthy people? As opposed to, for example, a cancer drug where the risk assessment is different. Okay, someone could progress and potentially die like from cancer. So maybe they need chemo, and yeah, the side effects are losing your hair and all of these things, but that risk assessment is different. And so there are checkpoints in the system, even starting back to the work that my team specifically did on the preclinical side, where we had to answer questions about, you know, every single monkey even that got the vaccine. You know, we had to send FDA data packages about animals that were huge data packets. And so when you think about how nitpicky the regulatory agencies are about that, and how each step is basically a checkpoint to go to the next step. So yes, it looks good in monkeys. Take it to people in 50 people, then take it to people in 500 people. And then that's when you get to the point where you can go into 30,000 people. And then obviously that's when you get to the point it's safe and effective and you can go into, you know, tens of millions of people. And so at any step, also, the FDA, as we've seen, for example, with the Johnson & Johnson trial that was halted for a couple of days, has the ability to say, no, the risk assessment is not looking great for healthy people. And so therefore, we're going to pause this and reassess. And if they can do that off of 6 blood clots, imagine what they would do in any other case. And so I want to just kind of remind people that the system is a lot different than how it's viewed. And I understand that this is actually the first time that we're all seeing development of any drug really, but particularly a vaccine in our eyes on a day-to-day basis. And so we're all being introduced to this in very real time, but understand that the checkpoints in the system are just, they kept me up at night. So
I bet they did. Okay, so I want to go back to something you said, animal trials, because one of the things that are going around on the internet is that they skipped the animal trials because it was causing problems with the air. So could you just talk about that? So you gave me a lot of different steps that happened before we even got to the big clinical trial with people. So there were animal trials.
That rumor actually makes me really mad because, like, to be 35 and to have your data in like the world's leading journals where it's very clear and convincing, and you know, hundreds of animals and millions of dollars spent for someone to just decide one day to make that lie up and put it on the internet is actually very sad. And so we absolutely, you cannot skip animals, even if you wanted to, right? You must prove safety and that you elicit an immune response in animals prior to you obviously going into human beings. And so we've tested this vaccine in mice, hamsters, and also monkeys. And those data are published and actually with my name on them. So, and they're very clear and convincing. And so, yeah, no one skipped any animal trials. It's impossible. You can't imagine doing that with the FDA.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And no animals died and all of this ridiculous. Actually, the opposite is truth. When you look at the graphs, I mean, the vaccine clearly prevented animals from dying from COVID.
Thank you for that. Yes. So you were in the trenches. We're hearing it right from the source.
You get you as a 16-year-old, you're like, I want to be a scientist. And then you get to the point where you are one at 35 and you're publishing in Nature and Science and all of these like top tier journals. And then someone says, you didn't even do the work, which makes me sad. So I'm very avid about that.
Well, I love it. I think it's great. You should definitely be proud of your craft and defend all of this, because there's a lot just swirling out there that just seems to have more momentum than the truth. And I guess that is how that tends to work. And so you talked about all those steps that got us to the approval. But what about after that? I think there's also this concern that, okay, now you just unleashed it and you're just going to leave us to our devices and then we don't know what's going to happen. So what about after that?
No, I mean, obviously there is a surveillance system. That's how the Johnson & Johnson 6 blood clots were found, right? There's a reporting system with the CDC. Each of the vaccine manufacturers have still, to this day, those initial 30,000 people that got vaccinated are being followed and they're being bled. I think now we're at the point where we're bleeding people every 2 months. So we're looking at safety signals consistently in the trial participants. We're looking at the levels of their immune responses consistently in the trial participants. It is a system that continuously is going to watch these vaccines over time. And it's not just for these vaccines either. I want people to realize that this actually happens yearly. With the flu vaccine, there is an engraved surveillance system that nothing can just be unleashed into the American population without some level of what is going on now. It's basically, that's the top-down look that the FDA has.
And so before this, just nobody cared. Nobody's really paid attention. And so, but now that we all care and we all have, and I keep saying this is great. I wish everyone asked as many questions when they got, opiate prescriptions. Maybe we could have avoided that, epidemic. And so I think it's good that we have people's attention, but how can they find out about this? Like how do they keep, because I think people are seeing YouTube videos and all these different things, but I want to know how do we find out about those 30,000 trial participants that you just said, and you said bleeding. So I want you to tell me what that means. You're bleeding them every 2 months. And so what are you looking for? And then how does the public get to hear about that? Because I think, knowing what happened with that original group is so important, but how does that get made public?
So we publish data all the time. Generally speaking, because of how things are happening right now with just the vaccine rollout, and generally the news is like, I don't know, what does the news talk about these days? In the beginning, our data was like the headline news, but now, generally speaking, you do actually have to look for it because it's not, everyone knows, right? You publish just a 9-month follow-up. Okay, cool. It doesn't say anything different. It's safe and effective. So it's not that big of breaking news now. So if you really want to stay on top of the data, the best way to do that is to sign up for alerts with the CDC. The CDC generally breaks down new data in a very digestible way. I generally post every single thing that comes out in regards to particularly in regards to our vaccine. So whenever we post data online, I generally put that out there. And understand too, that even if you are not in the trenches or reading the data, because it's hard to decipher sometimes, or if you don't keep up with it on a day-to-day basis, when there is a recommendation, like for example, the new mask guidance, when there is a when there's a recommendation that comes from data. It's not like, these agencies wake up and say, we're going to decide to let people take their mask off today. Actually, what happens is there is clear and convincing evidence, a body of literature that supports removing of masks. And that body of literature partially came from our laboratory and our team, but from many other teams around the world that say, okay, people who are vaccinated clearly aren't transmitting the virus. And so let's let them take their mask off. And so understand that there are, as hard as it, and I understand the trust is, I completely get that. And I'm a government employee, and I understand that. But understanding that while there is this kind of mistrust and distrust, who can we trust? And actually beyond what is mistrust, it also is in the opposite way, like, do they honor you enough to keep you safe? And having to kind of grapple with that, understanding that, but then also understanding the times where there is a different level of transparency than we have ever seen before. And taking advantage of that transparency, I find, is the best way to kind of bridge the gap. So if they're being more transparent and they're saying, okay, we'll let you listen to the FDA hearings. Every time there's data that comes out, we're going to present it to you in a digestible manner. We are going to allow me, for example, take over Michelle Obama's Instagram account, like all of these things that are happening. And following that level of meeting that transparency in the middle, I find is really the bridge to the mistrust and distrust.
Thank you for addressing the mistrust and distrust, because definitely on the ground, we feel like, so, at our health center, we know the community trusts us. So they're looking to us to help kind of like decipher and sort these things out. How can community health centers like ours, or just folks that are on the ground, experiencing things, hearing things, collecting our own data, how can we, or should we be able to help contribute or inform kind of the process that goes on at your level? Because isn't that, do you feel like that's part of bridging that gap, and how can we do that better?
I think if I'm misinterpreting the question, please let me know. But I think you're asking, how can people that are kind of on the ground in the community help to bridge the trust gap? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I think we're trusted, right? But how can you hear from us? How can we help lift up the voices of our community that can help? Because you mentioned the CDC mask mandate. I'm glad that you brought it up, because it may be based on data, but at the same time, what is it doing to people's behavior? How well was it communicated? Like, how can we talk about?
Oh yeah, so yeah. So the behavioral aspects of it and the social science aspect of it is actually just not my wheel bag. I'm going to be completely honest. So how those types of aspects are informed are through epidemiologists at the CDC. So that is the type of situation where those types of inquiries have to go directly to the CDC. Understanding that, yes, right, there's going to be caveats with every single recommendation and sometimes I get a little bit mad because everybody wants to write like an opinion about every recommendation, but it's also like writing the opinion is like, okay, cool, but also the CDC has a line for that. And the federal government actually now has a COVID community core where those types of those, is it core or corp? I'm pretty sure it's CORP. Excuse me if I'm misstating that. But anyway, those are the types of things that go directly to them. And it is a situation where we have to extend grace because we are working in real time here and in, what are dire times as well. And so, sure, how was that communicated? Maybe a little bit better. It could have been, but similar to myself in the situation, we're all like learning together. And, the administration just switched in all of these things.
I think the learning as we go part has been really hard for folks who say, well, they said that last month and now they're saying this month. And so I
cannot wait to dismantle the way that science is taught to people in the community. And however, I'm thinking a million ways to do that, because I think that one of the things that is just missing is that it's very hard for people to wrap their head around the scientific process. And so everything that you learn is built upon the thing that you learned before. And so it's like, they developed a vaccine in a year, but really if you were to really put the timeline together, the timeline would even predate me getting a PhD. And that's the same way that things are happening now. It's like in the beginning of the pandemic, it's maybe you don't have to wear a mask. And then it's now you do have to wear a mask because data came out that suggested that the virus was being spread by really little droplets from your mouth. But those are the kinds of things that, as the recommendations are set forth to people, are not articulated as well as they could be. And I completely understand that.
Yes, it's been a very dynamic and quick process. So maybe we could get to sort of is there anything at this point about the pandemic that kind of keeps you up at night? Is there anything that you're worried that you're worried about right now? This is a loaded question, I know.
Oh yeah, because I don't sleep. It's not keeping me up at night out of worry. It's keeping me up at night because of the workload, honestly. I even yesterday in a meeting with the director from my immediate center, he said, it doesn't seem to be letting up. And I said, I think we're in this. Like, I think this is what we're doing. I think we are responding to the pandemic with this vaccine effort. And previously, we thought, we'd get the vaccine into phase 1 and then to be smooth sailing from, we can kind of go back to our normal everyday lives. But the situation is certainly more dire than what the outlook was in the beginning. And people really are needing to see data in real time. And I'm just submitted a paper around the vaccine and the different variants, so we're still submitting data. We're still, answering FDA and other regulatory agencies around the world. And so we're in it. And so what keeps me up at night is just the simple workload of it all. But the worrying part for me is that we're going to get to the point where what we've all know to be herd immunity, where about, 70, 80%, depending on who speaks about it, of the population is immune to the virus. And that number is going to be taken on a American scale. And it's really going to look like suburbia. But there are going to be communities that are left out of that number largely because of the vaccine inquisitiveness that we're seeing now. And in the fall, in what is classical respiratory virus, how we call it laymanly flu season, there might be some communities that are completely devastated by this virus. And that is what really keeps me up at night. And that's why I'm, 4 p.m. after a sleepless week on this kind of call with you guys, because it is so important to make sure that people are not left out.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I think that's our worry too, is that, it'll be controlled on average, but we'll have communities left behind and disparities will get worse from here. And so thank you for pointing that out, that we're still not out of the woods, and that for the remaining unvaccinated, the risk is still real. My last question is, do you have any worry about the long-term effects of the vaccine itself? Do you think that there's any way that in a year or 5 years, we're going to say, because you see these memes going around, a call 1-800-LAW thing, and I know you've probably seen them, that we'll find out, 5 years later, and if not, why?
Well, the first reason, so no, blanketly. And the first reason is because messenger RNA has been in people for 15 years. And there have been no safety indications from all the way from cancer therapeutics to Zika vaccine trials, flu vaccine trial, anything. It's not like there have been no safety indications or long-term quote unquote side effects or anything of that nature. So no, I don't have those kinds of fears around the long-term effects of this vaccine, or really any vaccine while we're talking about it, because 90% of vaccine side effects are shown within the first 2 months of getting the vaccine. We are about a year and a couple months since the first person was injected with the SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 vaccine. 7 months since the phase 3, 30,000 people phase 3 started. And we started putting the vaccine into people in December. And so we're beyond that 2-month mark. And it's just, it is history. And also scientifically, it just does not make sense that there would be any long-term side effects.
Thank you for that. You dispelled a whole bunch of myths today. I appreciate
it. I can run down the list of side effects that people are concerned about, actually, if you want, but people are concerned about fertility. That doesn't make much sense biologically, because again, the message does not go to your DNA, and it doesn't stay around in your body for long. And also, there are hundreds of thousands of women who've been vaccinated, including a couple, I think 9 women from the clinical trials actually who were vaccinated and have been successfully gotten pregnant. It's just, the data are the data.
I love it. That's wonderful. Well, you brought up sort of, touched on it a little bit, but I want to just be real explicit about this. And I'm looking at some of the viewer questions as well now. How ready are we for variants and for mutations, and with the platform, as you said, so we're just ready to go. And so can you speak to that? What do you think that process is going to look like? How's the decision going to be made? Okay, we're going to need, and maybe talk a little bit about when we say booster, do we really mean a booster to boost the original one, or do we really mean that we're covering variants? What does that mean when we say booster? And what do you think that decision point is going to be to say, okay, time for a third shot?
So that was like 5 questions.
I told you I had a lot of questions.
So I'll start at the simple end of it around variants, and just to explain variants. So number one, even though I know that it's like the hype on the news at night, variants, oh my God, there's a variant in California, and there's a variant in New York. There is actually probably a variant in your neighborhood. If someone was to go and deep sequence everybody who got infected in your neighborhood this past week, they would find a mutation. Because that is how viruses work. This virus had one job. Its job was to infect a human being and then to transmit from human to human around the world, which it has done. And as doing that, it is learning to be better at it, and which it is doing. And that's why it picks up mutations. But you shouldn't be alarmed by those mutations, because it is consistently showing, even with trials in South Africa and Brazil and all of these places with the vaccines, that even though we sit at a 95% efficacy in the United States, sure, maybe the efficacy goes down to 85%, but a reminder that it is still very superb efficacy for a vaccine, very superb. So we are monitoring the variants on a day in and day out basis. I'm on a call about variants every other day, probably. And right now, there is no real concern around the variants. But what is concerning is the fact that we're still letting them pop up. And the reason is because we're not stopping transmission fast enough. And the way to stop variants is to not be a host and allow yourself and your body to make to make virus mutations. And so when we think about a booster, there are many reasons why a vaccine might need to be boosted. And getting booster shots, we've all heard of booster shots, right? That's not necessarily new. The reason why you get booster shots sometimes with vaccines is because you get to a point where your immune system is not making the optimal type of response that would be optimally protective for you. And so that is why every couple of months, 30,000 people go over to their clinical trial site. They get blood taken out of their arm. That blood goes off to laboratories, including ours at the National Institutes of Health. And we ask the question, what do the immune responses look like today? So now we are 9 months into that process. And so as you track the immune responses, you can say, okay, maybe it might be time to boost the entire population because the immune responses are waning off a little bit. As of today, and for the at least foreseeable future, as we can tell, a booster is not imminent. Is it plausible in the future? Yes. And so when you say, are we ready for boosters? Yes, because we want to be at that day when we say, oh my God, we probably want to start thinking about boosting people in the next month or whatever, right? We want to be able to say, we have 360 million doses of booster for every single person in this country. And so that is how this system is operating. So when you hear about the boosters, don't be alarmed. Just understand that in the same way that we were prepared last January, we're going to be prepared whenever there needs to be a booster shot.
Great, thank you. Here's a great question from one of the viewers, which is, what happens to the spike proteins that are created? Can they linger in the body and cause harm?
No. Okay. Ooh, do I get to do a science? I get to do an immunology.
Please do, yeah. Science class.
let me practice for these students at Harvard real quick. So this is the virus, and these little red things are the spike proteins, and someone clearly knows that because they said spike protein in their question. But the way that the vaccines work is by just taking this spike protein and delivering the message for that to your body. So basically your body makes the little red things inside in your muscle cells. And the way that the body makes an immune response to that is that all the immune cells in your body go over to that place. And that's why you have like the tenderness in your arm and, maybe get some fatigue and fever, etc. They go over to that place and then basically go over there to learn what it looks like. In learning what it looks like, they chew it up, they take it away and take it over to like your lymph node. Basically, in all, at the end of it, these spike proteins in your body are gone within a week because your immune system has notified your body that it was a danger and got rid of them.
That was very clear. Thank you. So what about for that week? Could it go around poking things and damaging things in the body?
No, they don't go around. That's the other thing. Shedding. Oh, did y'all see that meme? I hated it. Oh, it made me so sad. Because it was so wrong. Yeah, they don't go around poking things. You know why? In the same way that they are anchored inside of this virus, they are anchored on your cells. So it's not like you have spike floating around, going to your brain, your eyes. They are right there in your muscle, waiting for the immune cells to come pick them up.
That's very clear. Thank you. And so the shedding, and I think this is a little bit related to another viewer question. So this whole thing about shedding, I mean, this is a thing, right? With other vaccines, live vaccines. So tell us, someone wanted to know, how do we talk to our family about the fact that we're not actually injecting the virus into your body? And where did this all come from? Because we know that there are live vaccines, other kind of things. And so could you kind of talk us through that and why this is not the case here?
And there are actually live vaccines for coronaviruses too, like in Russia and China, just not in the United States. Because here we're taking advantage of technologies that have transformed vaccine development. And they're called live vaccines, but really they're taking the whole virus and they're just giving your body a weakened version of it so that you don't really get sick, but that you get enough immune response to alert your body to the virus. Nevertheless, we're not doing that in this case. Could it have been fine to do that? Perhaps, but in this case, we're not doing that. And so you're not shedding virus if you get vaccinated because you haven't even been given any virus at all. In fact, you're only given that red protein, that one spike protein. That is all that your body is getting, is that one protein, nothing else.
Thank you for that. And so people who are unvaccinated shouldn't be worried about people who are vaccinated possibly giving them.
People who are unvaccinated should be worried about other unvaccinated people giving them coronavirus.
Absolutely. And so you hear this thing, well, people are getting the vaccine, but they're getting COVID anyway. So what is the point of me getting the vaccine?
People who are getting the vaccine largely are not getting COVID anyway. People who are getting vaccinated, there are breakthrough cases because vaccine efficacy is not 100%. So sure, if you might be in the 5% of people that are unfortunately not protected by the vaccine, that would be unfortunate. But if you come into contact with coronavirus, there is a 100% chance, most likely, that you will get infected, and then another 70% chance that you will get sick. And so the risk assessment there is overwhelmingly in favor of getting the vaccine.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing up risk assessment so many times, because I think that that's a real skill that maybe in science we're used to.
It is. I know it you know, it's actually, I before this moment, I really took that lightly. That, you know, because the way that we think as humans, including myself, and I'm terrible at this, I'm actually trying to learn my way out of it. It's like worst case scenario. So it's very difficult to see the 95% efficacy when you see the 5% of people who still might get coronavirus if they're vaccinated. And you automatically put yourself into that category, as opposed to saying, what if things go right? Which is actually the more plausible reasoning.
Absolutely. So basically, if you happen to be one of those people in the 5%, well, that means you would have had to gotten yourself exposed as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means you probably went around someone unvaccinated who had it, and then you got it, but then then the chances of you dying or being severely ill are almost eliminated, is what it was been looking like from the trials, right?
Absolutely. That's why, you know, the hospitals, I think there was one hospital yesterday, the first hospital to report no COVID cases came in that day. And that's why you're seeing, you know, very, you know, a large decrease in the amount of hospitalizations and deaths, because people are being vaccinated now.
Absolutely. So you talked about what you're worried about, which is sort of pockets of unvaccinated people remaining and then having outbreaks. And so are we out of the woods for the most part? Where are you feeling? Where are we? Are we still in a race a little bit? What do you think?
I think that we are doing great as a country. I think that they're very clear. The numbers very clearly indicate that the urge to be vaccinated has maybe dropped a little bit. And that could come from, you know, multiple things, right? You know, maybe we just have gotten to the point where everybody who was going to get vaccinated is vaccinated, or whatever the case may be. But we do have a long ways to go in order to really tip the scale to the point of where we have so-called herd immunity, and understanding that there is still a large amount of us who are unvaccinated, including, you know, children, immunocompromised people. I was just on like a call the other day with an oncologist who is doing some vaccine work for like cancer patients. Like, so there's still a large portion of us who are unvaccinated. So there is still some ways to go. But I think overall, both the scientific community, the medical community, and people have done what needs to be done in regards to getting vaccinated and getting us back to some level of comfort.
Wonderful. Are there any people who cannot get vaccinated? And I have a question here from a viewer about what about people who are HIV positive? What about people who are on dialysis?
Vaccinate them. So actually, HIV positivity, that was a whole subset in our phase 3 clinical trial. I forget the actual percentage of people who were HIV positive, but we enroll people with kidney diseases, HIV positive people, heart disease, obviously, obesity, diabetes. So we tested a full spectrum of what are considered to be comorbidities in the phase 3 clinical trial, so that I could get on this call and say that it's not just the healthy white man that efficacy signal was shown in, but also Black people and people with diabetes and HIV positive people, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, for an HIV positive person, one would want to have their disease under control so that they do have an immune response that can take the vaccine. But that is a conversation between them and their physician.
And so the concern there is not that it wouldn't be safe for those folks, but we just want to make sure they have an optimal response to it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. Can you say anything about the effect of the vaccine on long COVID? Do we know much about that? And maybe
There
as a part two to that.
There haven't really
Okay,
even been any studies on that, because if nobody's getting COVID, then how do you study long COVID? So I think that the answer to that question is
people who have long COVID now getting the vaccine.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I've seen the anecdotal evidence.
Right.
I should say, I don't like to call anecdotes evidence. Sorry. So I've seen the anecdotal accounts of that. And the NIH is actually doing a study on long COVID. So some of those answers will start to come out, but there's no data in a very controlled way to answer that question.
That was a very scientific answer. So what I appreciate that, because the other question that's related is, so I had COVID, so do I need to get the vaccine? Or I had COVID, do I need to get both doses?
Okay. Yes. So wait, there's two questions there. You do a lot of the 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. So the first question, was, if you've had COVID, do you need to get vaccine? Yes. That answer is unequivocally yes. I'm going to tell you why, to spice it up with just a little bit of science in the last 2 minutes. Because people who have had COVID before, about 1/3 of those people actually do not mount a really good antibody response. And I know you might say, oh, I took an antibody test and I have antibodies, but those tests are yes and no, not to what level. What we do know is that 100% of at least healthy people have immune responses or antibody responses that are overwhelmingly supersede anything that coronavirus could actually give you naturally. So you want to put yourself in that category of an overwhelmingly protective antibody response. And so you've seen people who've had COVID get COVID twice. I actually have a friend who had COVID 3 times. So these repeat infections go to say that getting coronavirus is not a fail-safe way to say I won't get it again. And it's also not a fail-safe way to say that I won't get it worse the second time. So that is the reason why you want to get your vaccine. The recommendation currently is that anyone who has who has recovered from COVID, get vaccinated and get the full course of the vaccine. That is 1 dose with Johnson & Johnson or 2 doses with Pfizer and Moderna. There is some data that suggests that maybe those recommendations will change. I assume that that recommendation hasn't changed yet because it might confuse the rollout. But nevertheless, there is data that suggests that one who has had COVID-19 before could get 1 dose of Pfizer and Moderna and still have a really great antibody response. But until the recommendation changes, you have nothing to lose by getting 2 doses.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to try to squeeze in one last one. What do you say to young women of color who may be looking at you and saying, maybe I am interested in science? What advice do you give to them?
Go do it, girl.
I heard get an internship at 16.
That is actually the only way that you can know what you like and what you don't like, is by just trying it. And so there are internship programs, American Chemical Society, American Lung Society, just about every research 1 level institution like the Harvards and the Stanfords and the state institutions, et cetera, that have internship programs. And so look for those internship programs and just dive into it. And then you can decide, do you like it or do you not? And I find that it is, I get a lot of requests from young women, particularly who want to do informational interviews. So finding someone who you feel like you could be one day and then asking them how they got there and then how you could get there is very helpful too.
I love that advice. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Thank you for the amazing world-changing work that you have done and will continue to do. And yeah, just really more power to you. And and keep fighting the good fight.
All right. Thank you guys. Bye.
Thank you.
So I hope that everybody enjoyed the conversation between Dr. Noha and Dr. Corbett today. It was some amazing information shared, and I know for me, I learned a lot, and hopefully you all did too. And I think she did a great job dispelling some of the myths that Dr. Noha mentioned have been flying around the community that I'm sure you all have heard, and I know I have too. So at least we know from firsthand, from the source, that there's a lot of rigor and science that went into the discovery and development of the vaccines, and that no shortcuts were taken, and that it was definitely, I think, one of the more inclusive, when we talk about diversity, clinical trials that has happened at least over the last decade. So hopefully you're able to take away a bit more information to share with folks that you know who might be a little hesitant or have questions or concerns about the vaccine. So if you could spread the word about the knowledge you gain here today, that would be fantastic. And so before we wrap it up today and say goodbye, again, I want to thank Dr. Noha for stepping in and doing a great job with the interview. And again, Dr. Corbett for agreeing to share her time with us today. And so just a few final housekeeping things. We have another event coming up for the Health Equity Forum on June 17th. It's a prostate cancer disparities forum or discussion. And I'm really excited about the fact that we have Dr. Dara Richardson-Heron, who's the Chief Patient Officer at Pfizer, as our special guest speaker. So you'll hear a lot about what Pfizer is doing around their D&I work, diversity and inclusion in clinical trials, and definitely what they're doing around their health equity initiatives within the company itself, and definitely extending out to the community. And Dr. Rick Kittles, who's from City of Hope, and then also Mark Kennedy, who both have a lot of experience and background in doing, for Dr. Kittles, research in disparities, especially related to prostate cancer, and then Mark Kennedy, who's done a lot of outreach and prevention-focused work to encourage more African-American men to get screened. So next slide, please. And so join us and connect with us. You can register for the June 17th event on our website. You can connect with us on social media. You can learn more about the campaign for Black Health Equity. So stay in touch and keep up to date on what we're doing and things that we will be having for the community. And with that, I'd like to say one last reminder: if you or someone you know is uninsured or need access to affordable health care, we are Cover California Navigator. Please call the office at 866-761-4165 to get more information about how you can get covered. And then a final thank you for all of you who attended today and who participated and asked a ton of great questions. So thank you very much. Happy Friday and have a great weekend.